My mother has imposed an open relationship on my girlfriend. Now I have to endure both my parents and my girlfriend. My girlfriend told me she wanted an open relationship. She said my mother convinced her that it was a good idea. She spoke about how my parents had never been happier since opening their marriage, how my mother felt free, how my father seemed more energized. She said it made sense for us to try it 2 months ago. My parents told me they had switched to an open marriage. They didn't sit me down for a serious conversation or ease into the subject. My mother just said it like it was a casual update, something as normal as telling me they were repainting the house. She said they weren't young anymore, that they had been together for decades, and that this change had brought excitement back into their lives. My father nodded in agreement, acting like it was completely reasonable. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just listened. I didn't approve of it, but I didn't try to stop them. It wasn't my relationship, so I ignored it. When my friends found out, they thought it was hilarious. They made jokes, asked if I ever worried about running into my parents on dating apps, and teased me about how progressive they were. I laughed it off and changed the subject every time. As long as their decisions didn't involve me, I didn't care. But it did involve me. My girlfriend had always liked my mother. They had long conversations, often about things I wasn't part of. She told me once that my mother was confident and open-minded, that she admired her energy. When my parents announced their open marriage, my girlfriend didn't react the way I expected. She wasn't disgusted or confused, she was interested. She said my mother seemed happier, freer, and that my father had a new kind of energy. She talked about how exciting it must be for them, how brave they were to try something new. I told her I didn't agree with it, but I wasn't going to tell them how to live their lives. She didn't push the topic, and I thought that was the end of it. I had no idea that conversation was only the beginning. The first time my mother brought it up to me, I thought she was joking. She had already told me about her and my father's open marriage, and I had made it clear that I wasn't interested in discussing it. But one day, out of nowhere, she shifted the conversation to me and my girlfriend. She said we had been together for a while, that relationships could become routine, and that we should think about evolving. She said it with a smile, like she was offering casual advice, but I felt uncomfortable immediately. I told her no. I said I had no interest in that kind of relationship. She tilted her head, like she didn't understand why I was being so closed-minded. She told me that I should at least consider it, that opening up a relationship could bring excitement and growth. She pointed to her own marriage as proof that it worked. She talked about how she and my father felt renewed, how they had never been more in sync. I told her again that I wasn't interested. I didn't want to argue, so I left it at that. I assumed she would drop it and move on, but she didn't. A few weeks later, she brought it up again. This time, it was more direct. She said she had been thinking about my relationship, about how my girlfriend was young and full of life, and how it was only natural that she might want more than just one person for the rest of her life. She said monogamy wasn't realistic for everyone. She said if I truly cared about my girlfriend's happiness, I should at least give her the option. I was annoyed but kept my response short. I told her to stop pushing her lifestyle onto me. She shrugged and said she just wanted me to be happy. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong because while I had shut down the conversation, my mother had found someone else to talk to. My girlfriend. I didn't know my mother had spoken to my girlfriend until it was too late. At first, nothing seemed different. My girlfriend still acted the same, and she never mentioned anything unusual. But looking back, there were small signs. She started bringing up my parents more often, casually mentioning how my mother seemed more alive, how my father looked more relaxed. She said their decision had made them stronger, that it had brought new excitement into their lives. I dismissed it. I didn't want to have this conversation again. I had already told my mother no, and I didn't think my girlfriend would ever take the idea seriously. I thought she was just making observations, nothing more than. One evening, she came home after spending time with my mother. She seemed thoughtful, like something was on her mind. When I asked her what was wrong, she just said she and my mother had been talking about relationships. I asked what she meant, but she only said they had an interesting discussion. She didn't push the topic, and I didn't either. A few days later, she brought it up again. This time, she was more direct. She said my mother had a good point about relationships needing growth. She asked if I had ever thought about trying something different. She wasn't pressuring me, at least, not yet, but she was clearly curious. I immediately told her I wasn't interested. She didn't argue, but she didn't drop it either. Over the next few weeks, she kept mentioning my parents. She talked about how brave they were, how they had made a choice that allowed them to be free without losing each other. She said relationships should be about trust and honesty, not just exclusivity. That was when I started to realize what had happened. My mother had gotten into her head. She had convinced my girlfriend that this was a good thing, that it was normal, that it was something we should want. My mother had done what I never thought possible. She had made my girlfriend question our entire relationship, and soon, she wasn't just questioning it. She was considering it. The first time my mother suggested an open marriage, my father didn't want it. He told her he was happy with the way things were. But my mother didn't let it go. She kept bringing it up, telling him how life was too short to settle for routine. She said relationships should evolve, that they should bring excitement, that this was the best way to stay together without feeling trapped. At first, my father resisted. He told her he didn't see the point, that they had been married for decades without any problems. But my mother was persistent. She told him this was about growth, that they could experience more without losing what they had. Eventually, he gave in. My mother convinced him that this was the right thing to do now. She had done the same thing to my girlfriend at first. My girlfriend was just curious. She said my mother seemed happier, that my father had changed in a good way. Then she started talking about relationships needing freedom, about how people shouldn't limit themselves. She kept saying my parents were proof that it worked. Then one evening, she sat me down. This time, she wasn't just asking if I had ever thought about an open relationship, she was suggesting it. She said she had been thinking about it seriously, that it could make us stronger. She told me it wasn't about replacing me, that it was about trust, about growth. She used the same words my mother had used on my father. I told her no. I said I wasn't interested. I didn't care what my parents were doing. This wasn't for me. She didn't argue, but she didn't accept my answer either. She said I should at least think about it, that maybe I was being too rigid. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother had convinced my father to change his marriage, and now she had done the same to my girlfriend. The conversation ended, but I knew it wasn't over. I thought saying no would be the end of it. I thought my girlfriend would eventually let it go. But I underestimated just how much my mother had influenced her. A few days later, my mother called me. Her tone was calm, but there was something firm about it. She told me I was being selfish. She said relationships weren't meant to be cages, and that if I truly loved my girlfriend, I would at least consider what she wanted. She reminded me that my father had been against it at first too, but now he was happier than ever. She said I was too young to trap myself in outdated ideas. Then she got serious. She told me that if I kept resisting, my girlfriend might start to feel resentful. She said it would be a shame if she had to choose between me and her own happiness. She asked if I had really thought about what would happen if I kept refusing to grow. The conversation left me angry, but I still didn't think much of it. My mother had always been controlling, always pushing her own beliefs onto others. But then my girlfriend said the same thing. She told me she had made up her mind. She wasn't just suggesting an open relationship anymore. She was telling me that this was what she wanted. She said my refusal to even consider it showed that I didn't care about her happiness. She said my mother was right, that I was being selfish. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. She told me that if I kept saying no, she would have to start thinking about what she really wanted out of life. She said she loved me, but she wouldn't stay in a relationship where she felt trapped. She said I had to understand that people change, and if I refused to change with her, she wasn't sure where that would leave us. It wasn't an argument anymore. It was an ultimatum. My mother and my girlfriend had both made it clear, either I gave in, or I risked losing my relationship. I tried to ignore the threats. I told myself they were just pushing me, trying to make me give in. But things didn't stop. My mother kept calling, reminding me that my father had resisted at first too, that I was being unreasonable, that my girlfriend deserved more. She said I needed to stop being so stubborn before I ruined everything. My girlfriend wasn't any better. She stopped treating it like a discussion. She acted like I was the only thing standing in the way of our growth. She told me that if I really loved her, I would at least try to understand. She said I was being immature, that I was afraid of change, that I was the problem. Then things escalated. My mother told me that I was at risk of pushing everyone away. She said my father was finally living life on his terms, that my girlfriend was learning what true freedom was, and that if I kept resisting, I would be left behind. She told me that maybe I needed to experience it firsthand. Maybe I needed to see how it felt to lose someone because I refused to evolve. That same night, my girlfriend told me she was done arguing. She said I had two choices. Either I agreed to an open relationship, or she would start seeing other people anyway. She told me she didn't want to leave me, but she wasn't going to let me control her happiness. She said it was my decision whether I wanted to be part of this next stage of her life or not. He couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was manipulation. My mother had done this to my father, and now she had done it to my girlfriend. Now, they were both doing it to me. Felt trapped. If I refused, I risked losing my relationship. If I agreed, I would be doing something I hated just to keep her. No matter what I chose, I had already lost. I refused to answer right away. I told my girlfriend I needed time to think. She didn't like that. She said there was nothing to think about. She told me she had already been patient, that I had ignored all the signs of change, that she had given me every chance to be part of this decision. She said she wasn't waiting any longer. I told her again that I didn't want an open relationship. I told her that if she wanted to be with other people, she could, but not while she was with me. She looked at me like I had said something ridiculous. She said I was the one being unreasonable, that I was acting like a child. She told me I was too insecure to handle a modern relationship. I didn't care what she thought anymore. I told her that if she wanted freedom, she could have it. Without me, that was when she got angry. She accused me of being controlling, of trying to punish her for wanting something different. She told me I was the only person in her life who refused to see the truth. She said my mother was right, that I was holding on to a broken idea of relationships, that I was stuck in the past, and that eventually, I would be alone because of it. My mother called me the next day. She told me I was making a mistake. She said my girlfriend was offering me something special, something people spent years trying to understand. She told me my father had learned to accept it, that I would too. Then she said something that made my decision final. She told me that if I let my girlfriend go, I would regret it. That I would never find someone as open-minded, as free, as understanding as her. She said I was ruining my life over my own fear. I told her I didn't care. I told her I was done. When I told my girlfriend, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just said she was disappointed. She said she hoped one day I would grow up and understand. Then she packed a bag and left. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I just felt exhausted. My mother had destroyed my relationship. My girlfriend had chosen my mother's ideas over me. And my father? He had accepted it. I was the only one left standing after my girlfriend left. I expected to feel some kind of relief. Instead, all I felt was anger. Not just at her, but at my mother, at my father, at the entire situation I had been forced into. My relationship had been fine before my mother interfered. We had no problems. But she had planted an idea in my girlfriend's mind, just like she had done with my father. She had convinced them both that what we had wasn't enough. And now, because I refused to follow her rules, I was the one left behind. My mother reached out again. She acted like nothing serious had happened, like I had just made a bad decision that I could still fix. She told me I was being dramatic, that I shouldn't have thrown away a good relationship over something so small. She said I was young, that I had so much life ahead of me, and that one day I would understand. I told her she was the reason this happened. She didn't like that. She told me I was being unfair, that she had only been trying to help. She said she had just wanted me to experience what she and my father had found. I told her I wanted nothing to do with it. I told her she had already destroyed enough. My father never said anything. He had already accepted his place in all of this. He had let my mother reshape their marriage, and now he just went along with whatever she wanted. I blocked my mother's number. I stopped answering her messages. I didn't want to hear any more about how I was wrong, how I needed to grow, how I had thrown away something good. My relationship ended because of her, and I wasn't going to let her justify it now. I don't know what to do. I feel like I lost more than just my girlfriend. I lost my mother, my father, and the idea that my relationship was ever really mine to begin with. I never thought I would say this, but I need advice. Was there anything I could have done differently? Or was this doomed from the moment my mother got involved?